watching Capitol Prime.
At 3:41 in the morning on January 26th, Colombian President Gustavo Petro sent a message on social media that would trigger an international crisis within hours. 2 U.S. military planes were already in the air carrying 160 Colombian deportees in handcuffs. Petro typed, "The U.S. cannot treat Colombian migrants as criminals. I disallow the entry of U.S. planes carrying Colombian migrants into our territory." The planes were forced to turn around mid-flight. By noon, Donald Trump had threatened a trade war. By evening, Colombia had backed down. And by Tuesday, the first deportees were landing in Bogota, but not on U.S. military planes. Subscribe to Capitol Prime and turn on notifications, because what happened over these 48 hours reveals Trump's strategy for dealing with any country that challenges his deportation agenda. And it's working. This is the story of how Trump used tariff threats as a weapon, how one Latin American president tried to resist, and what it means for the 11 million undocumented immigrants living in America right now. For years, the United States and Colombia had a bilateral agreement on deportations. It was routine. Twice a week, sometimes more, the U.S. would send Colombia a manifest 48 hours before a flight, a list of names of Colombian nationals being deported. Colombia would review it, provide authorization, and the planes would land without incident. This wasn't controversial. This wasn't news. This was standard procedure that had been happening for decades under Democratic and Republican administrations alike. But something changed under Trump's second term. And it wasn't the deportations themselves, it was how the deportees were being treated. On Friday, January 24th, Brazil's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a formal complaint about a deportation flight that had landed in Brasilia. The Brazilian government described the treatment of deportees as degrading. News footage showed the scene. Deportees walking off planes with their hands shackled in front of them, their feet chained together. Some were wearing ankle monitors. They were being treated, as one Brazilian official put it, like dangerous criminals being transferred between prisons. Brazil demanded an explanation from the U.S. State Department. Colombia's President Petro was watching. Gustavo Petro is not your typical Latin American president. He's a former guerrilla fighter. He's a leftist who has made anti-U.S. rhetoric part of his political brand. And he's known for making impulsive decisions on social media without consulting his own cabinet. At 3:41 in the morning on January 26th, Petro saw the footage from Brazil. He saw migrants in handcuffs and chains, and he made a decision that would shock his own government. He posted on X, "A migrant is not a criminal and must be treated with the dignity that a human being deserves. I deny the entry of American planes carrying Colombian migrants into our territory." 2 U.S. Air Force C-17 military cargo planes were already in the air. They had taken off from California hours earlier, each carrying about 80 Colombian deportees. They were mid-flight over Central America when Colombia revoked authorization. The planes were ordered to turn around. According to a Colombian official who spoke to the Washington Post, even Petro's own foreign ministry didn't know he was going to do this. They had already approved the flights. The authorization had been granted 48 hours earlier as required. But Petro overruled them publicly on social media in the middle of the night. Donald Trump found out about Colombia's decision Sunday morning. His response was immediate and overwhelming. At 11:47 a.m. Eastern Time, Trump posted on Truth Social, "I was just informed that 2 repatriation flights from the United States with a large number of illegal criminals were not allowed to land in Colombia." He claimed Petro's decision jeopardized the national security and public safety of the United States. Then came the threats, and they were brutal. Trump announced 25% emergency tariffs on all Colombian goods entering the United States, effective immediately. Those tariffs would rise to 50% in 1 week if Colombia didn't comply. A travel ban on all Colombian government officials, immediate visa revocations for Colombian officials, their families, and their supporters. enhanced customs inspections on all Colombian nationals and cargo, banking, and financial sanctions. Trump ended with, "These measures are just the beginning. We will not allow the Colombian government to violate its legal obligations with regard to the acceptance and return of the criminals they forced into the United States." Later, Trump posted an image of himself in a pinstripe suit and fedora standing in front of a sign that read FAFO, an acronym for fuck around and find out. The message was clear: challenge me on deportations and I will destroy your economy. For about 6 hours, Gustavo Petro tried to stand his ground. He responded on X, "You will never see me burning a US flag." He announced retaliatory 25% tariffs on all US goods entering Colombia. He ordered his foreign trade minister to begin redirecting Colombian exports away from the United States and toward other markets. He posted, "American products whose price will rise within the national economy must be replaced by national products, and the government will help in this regard." For a moment, it looked like Colombia might actually resist, but then the economic reality set in. Here's what Colombia's leadership was looking at by mid-afternoon Sunday. Colombia exports $24.8 billion worth of goods to the United States every year. The US is Colombia's largest trading partner by far. The top export, petroleum, $6 billion annually. Second, coffee, $1.8 billion. Colombia supplies 20% of all coffee imported into the United States. Third, flowers. Valentine's Day was 2 weeks away. The Colombian flower industry was about to enter its most profitable season of the year. A 25% tariff rising to 50% would devastate them. Trump knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just threatening Colombia's economy, he was threatening it at the worst possible time. By Sunday evening, Colombia's foreign minister, Luis Gilberto Murillo, held a late-night press conference. "We have overcome the impasse," Murillo said. "Colombia will accept all citizens deported from the United States." The White House issued a statement. "The government of Colombia has agreed to all of President Trump's terms, including the unrestricted acceptance of all illegal aliens from Colombia returned from the United States, including on US military aircraft, without limitation or delay." The tariffs would be held in reserve, meaning Trump wasn't implementing them yet, but he would if Colombia backed out again. The visa sanctions would remain in effect until the first planned load of Colombian deportees is successfully returned. Colombia had folded completely. The entire standoff had lasted less than 12 hours. But Petro salvaged one thing from the wreckage: dignity. He couldn't stop the deportations, but he could control how they happened. Colombia's government announced it would send its own presidential plane and Colombian Air Force aircraft to pick up the deportees. They would fly to the United States, collect the migrants, and bring them back to Colombia on civilian aircraft, not US military cargo planes. The deportees would not be handcuffed. They would not be chained. They would not be treated like prisoners. On Tuesday, January 28th, 2 Colombian Air Force planes landed in Bogota carrying 201 deportees, 110 from California, 90 from Texas. Petro posted photos on social media showing the deportees walking off the planes freely without restraints. "They are Colombians," Petro wrote. "They are free and dignified, and they are in their homeland where they are loved. The migrant is not a criminal." The US called it a victory. Colombia called it a victory. Both sides claimed they won. But everyone understood what had really happened. Trump had used economic coercion to force compliance, and it worked. Colombia wasn't the first country to push back on Trump's deportation methods, and it won't be the last. Mexico has also turned away US military deportation flights, insisting on using Mexican government aircraft instead. Brazil filed a formal diplomatic complaint about the degrading treatment of deportees. Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador are all watching closely. They're all major sources of undocumented migration to the United States. They're all economically dependent on US trade and remittances. And They're all terrified of being the next country Trump threatens with tariffs. Here's the pattern that's emerging. 1. Trump uses military planes to deport migrants, treating them like prisoners. 2. Latin American countries object to the treatment. 3. Trump threatens massive tariffs and economic sanctions. 4. The countries back down within hours. 5. They agree to accept deportees, but insist on using their own civilian aircraft to preserve some dignity. It's a formula, and it's working. Let's talk about why this works so effectively. The United States has enormous economic leverage over Latin America. These are not equal partners. These are asymmetric relationships where one side holds almost all the cards. Take Colombia. The US is Colombia's largest trading partner, but Colombia ranks 22nd among US trading partners. The US can afford to lose Colombia. Colombia cannot afford to lose the US. When Trump threatens 25% tariffs, he's not just threatening abstract economic numbers. He's threatening coffee farmers who will lose their livelihoods, flower growers facing bankruptcy right before Valentine's Day, petroleum workers whose jobs depend on US imports, millions of Colombians whose family members send remittances from the United States. Colombian Liberal Party, a center-left party that had been part of Petro's governing coalition, withdrew from the government 2 days after the standoff. They cited the diplomatic crisis with the United States as one of their reasons. Petro's political opponents accused him of tremendous irresponsibility and warned that his confrontation with Trump could structurally affect our economy. Even Petro's allies were furious that he hadn't consulted them before blocking the flights. The message was clear. You cannot afford to defy the United States. The economic cost is too high. But underneath the geopolitics and the tariff threats, there's a real question about how deportees should be treated. Brazil's complaint wasn't frivolous. The footage from that deportation flight showed people in chains, ankle shackles, hand restraints, being marched off military cargo planes like they were being transferred between prisons. International law requires that deportees be treated humanely. The International Organization for Migration has guidelines. Migrants being returned to their home countries should not be restrained unless they pose a genuine threat to themselves or others. But Trump's approach treats all deportees as criminals by default. Military planes, cargo holds, chains and handcuffs, maximum security protocols. Gustavo Petro, for all his political missteps, was asking a legitimate question. Why are migrants who crossed a border illegally being treated the same way as violent criminals being extradited for trial? The Trump administration's answer is simple. They broke the law. They entered the country illegally. Therefore, they are criminals. And criminals get handcuffs. But that logic creates a problem. If every person who overstayed a visa or crossed the border without authorization is treated like a dangerous felon, you're criminalizing millions of people, many of whom have been living peacefully in the United States for years, raising families, working jobs, paying taxes. The standoff had immediate political consequences for Gustavo Petro. His approval ratings were already low. Colombians are frustrated with his handling of the economy, rising crime, and his confrontational political style. The Colombia Liberal Party, which had been part of Petro's coalition government, pulled out 2 days after the Trump confrontation. They said they could no longer support a president who was willing to risk Colombia's economic relationship with the United States over a symbolic gesture. Petro's foreign ministry was reportedly blindsided by his decision. They had approved the deportation flights according to standard protocol. Petro overruled them publicly without consultation. Even some of Petro's supporters questioned whether the fight was worth it. Colombia gained nothing concrete. The deportations are still happening. The only difference is that Colombia now has to send its own planes to pick up the deportees at Colombia's expense. Former Colombian President Iván Duque, a conservative who served from 2018 to 2022, called Petro's decision an act of tremendous irresponsibility. It is urgent that the Petro government put the country above its populist prejudices and anti-US rhetoric, Duque said. Petro can't run for re-election due to term limits, but his political movement was hoping to maintain power through a successor in the 2026 elections. This crisis damaged those prospects. Step back and look at what Trump accomplished here. He faced pushback from a Latin American ally over deportation methods. Within 12 hours, he had forced complete capitulation using only the threat of tariffs. He didn't have to implement the tariffs. He didn't have to actually damage the economy. Just the threat was enough. Now, every other Latin American country knows if you resist Trump's deportations, you will face economic destruction. This gives Trump enormous leverage to carry out his mass deportation agenda without interference from countries of origin. Think about the scale of what Trump is planning. During the campaign, he promised the largest deportation operation in American history. Millions of people, tens of millions by some estimates. To pull that off, he needs cooperation from countries of origin. He needs Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Colombia, Brazil, Venezuela, and dozens of other countries to accept planes full of deportees on a daily basis. Before this crisis, it wasn't clear whether those countries would cooperate, especially with Trump's methods of using military aircraft and treating deportees like prisoners. Now it's clear they will cooperate because the alternative is economic catastrophe. But this isn't just about immigration. This is about how Trump intends to use tariffs as a tool of foreign policy. He threatened Canada and Mexico with 25% tariffs over immigration and fentanyl. They immediately sent officials to negotiate. He threatened the European Union with tariffs over trade practices. European leaders are scrambling to avoid a trade war. He threatened China with massive tariffs. China is preparing retaliatory measures. And now he's shown that he'll use tariff threats against even close US allies in Latin America if they don't comply with his demands. This is economic coercion on a scale we haven't seen from an American president in modern history. And it's working because the United States economy is so large and because so many countries depend on access to the US market, the threat of being cut off is existential. Colombia folded in 12 hours because they had no choice. But there are long-term consequences to this approach that we need to think about. When you use tariff threats to force compliance on issue after issue, countries start looking for alternatives. Oliver Della Costa Stunkel, an international relations professor in Brazil, told Al Jazeera, leaders across Latin America will look at these moments and will be increasingly aware of the risk of being too dependent on the US. What does that mean practically? It means Latin American countries will start diversifying their trade relationships. They'll strengthen ties with China, with Europe, with each other. It means they'll be less willing to align with the United States on other issues. Security cooperation, drug interdiction, regional diplomacy. It means the long-term influence of the United States in Latin America could decline even as Trump wins short-term tactical victories. 48 hours. That's how long it took for Trump to force Colombia to back down on deportations, using only the threat of tariffs. No actual economic damage was done. The tariffs were never implemented. But the threat alone was enough to make a sovereign nation reverse course completely. 201 Colombian deportees landed in Bogota on Tuesday on Colombian Air Force planes. They weren't handcuffed. They weren't chained. Petro got his small victory on the optics, but Trump got what he wanted. Complete cooperation on deportations, a demonstration that resistance is futile, and a warning to every other country in the hemisphere. This wasn't just about Colombia. This was about setting a precedent. Challenge me on immigration, and I will use economic weapons to destroy you. Back down within hours. Or watch your economy collapse. It worked in Colombia. It's working in Mexico. It's working everywhere Trump applies this formula. The question now is, How long can the United States maintain relationships with allies when those relationships are based on economic coercion rather than mutual respect? And what happens when countries decide the cost of cooperating with US deportations is too high, not economically, but politically and morally? We're going to find out. Because this is just the beginning of Trump's mass deportation agenda. Subscribe to Capital Prime, turn on notifications. Drop a comment. Do you think Trump's use of tariff threats is effective foreign policy, or does it damage America's long-term relationships? This is Capital Prime, where we investigate power, follow the facts, and ask the questions that matter. I'll see you in the next investigation.